I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Barker. And John, of course, is the 70th District at the House of Representatives, and also Stephen Johnson. And Stephen, you're the 108th District. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that would be the Assyria area.
Right.
Beautiful area. And thank you for being here. John, can you give me some updates, because you guys are finishing up another 2-week stretch since I last talked to you at the legislature, and there is a ton of stuff going on, so I'm anxious to hear about it.
Well, this is day 65, Doug. So we've got 2 more weeks before we have first adjournment, and I think that's on the 7th of April. So the next 2 weeks we're going to be on the floor most of the day. We'll also have some committee meetings. I know the exempt committees are meeting. I know Stephen here is chairman of tax. He'll be meeting. Chairman of appropriations will be meeting. Chairman of the educational budget committee, which is not an exempt committee, but they will be meeting because they have some exempt bills. And of course, I'll be meeting 2 or 3 times during that period of time. Plus, at the same time, we're going to go on the floor, actually work bills, pass bills out, then go to final action on those bills. So the next 2 weeks will be busy. There'll be long days, but we expect that every year.
Yeah, and let me see if I understand some of these terms when you say, like, working the bills. Bills have been submitted through committee, and that process is pretty much over as far as bills being submitted?
From non-exempt committees.
Okay.
And then, of course, they go referred to the House. The majority leader decides when he brings them above the line. We go into the committee of the whole. Both Stephen and I have chaired that at different times. If we pass them out of the committee of the whole, then the next day we go to final action, which means the final vote. So we'll pass out a number of bills, and of course some bills will be coming over from the Senate. We're sending bills back to the Senate. If we choose, if they amend our bills or we amend their bills, then usually conference committees are appointed, and we will be in conference probably the first week of April, from April 1st to April 7th. That's when conference committees meet. But what's been interesting this week, we had a bill today. It was 2182, legalizing hemp. Hemp is different than marijuana. It has a low THC. It's used in industrial hemp for ropes and stuff. So that had some interesting debate to it this morning. The last 2 days I've been working on the amusement park bill, which I previously mentioned that we're working on. We've also got a number of other bills that have passed or been introduced. The new school finance bill, I think it's, I have it here, 2410 is we're looking at. And I know I've talked to Denise Geim, our superintendent in Abilene,
Right.
kind of gave her an overview, and she had some questions, and I've tried to get the questions answered for her. So, the last week or so we're going to be busy. Stephen, I know, who's the tax man. We've worked together over the last 4 years. He was my first chairman of Pensions Capers, and we've enjoyed each other's company, and we vote together on many issues. We've voted, he introduced a bill a couple of years ago on the LLC sub-S's. I was with you on that one in the next year. So he's got a big job ahead of him. And at some point in time, we'll hopefully get a tax bill that we can all agree upon. But you never know. So it's an exciting time in the legislature. I always liked the last couple of weeks. In the old days, we worked at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Of course, now we passed it I call the Cinderella rule, which means we need to finish at midnight. The Senate can go late, but we finish at midnight. But the 7th of April is the drop dead day. We've got a number of bills that are under the line that we will be working. Yeah, it's it's an exciting time.
Then when you go to adjournment, April 7th, how long are you adjourned before you come back into session?
We come back in the first week of May, and it's called the veto session, although we actually work bills during that period of time and have conference committees, and that's for 10 days. Our expected date is the 17th of May, which is Mother's Day. That's our 90th day. Would like to get out on the 90th day.
Do you think it's going to happen, or you think a lot of things would have to come together for that to happen?
A lot of things have got to come together. I'm optimistic. At this, when it gets about that time, the other members have plans. We plan on 90 days, and we want to get our job done, and we'll work late at night or early in the morning. But my objective is to get out by or before the 17th of April.
We're going to cut away in just a little bit, and we're going to take a break. When we come back, Stephen, I want to visit with you. I want to talk about the school finance, because that gets a lot of attention, and a number of other things. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Barker, and another special guest, Stephen Johnson from the 108th District, which is, of course, just south of Salina in the Assyria area. And, of course, John's from Chapman, Abilene, and a part of Clay Center, as I recall. Yeah.
Marion County.
Yep, and Marion County. Stephen, tell me, what committees are you chairing right now?
Well, I lead the tax committee at the moment, so that's the main focus that I have. I sit on the appropriations committee, but don't have a leading role there.
Okay, tell me about the tax committee. What are you guys working on?
Well, we're
a lot right now,
yeah,
I'm sure.
We're working on just finding enough revenue to get through the next year, and how to try and put that together. So early on, we looked at how do we want to try and balance that. There's not a ton of different things. Property, sales, or income tax are the extent of the choices we have, and generally, property is not our most favored one to try and increase more, since that's a hurdle that we have to cross every year. Our sales tax rates, while I am in favor of consumption taxes, we are the highest of our neighboring states and area by a pretty decent margin at the moment. So we were looking at what might we change to income tax, and looking at do we go part of the way back from where we came in 2012 to try and balance the budget.
Do you have a feel for it right now?
Well, we did pass a bill right out in the first month that raised rates about 80, or about actually 40% of the way back to where they were in 2012 from where they are currently. And that got us to just about even on the budget as it stands. If we paid the bills that we had, if we met the obligation to capers and other things, just about would get us to zero. So, and that's the one that went through the veto override process. Did not ultimately pass, but made it quite a ways. That's probably what folks gravitate to at the moment, although there are several other proposals.
You know, one of the things I hear about the sales tax, and like you said, being higher than the neighboring states, those people who are at the Kansas City area and on the borders of those areas feel like they have a disadvantage because, you know, if you're buying a car, that's a pretty significant difference, and they feel like, well, you know, we're losing out on sales because our sales tax is so high. You hear that, I'm sure.
Very definitely, and it's an issue everywhere. As you get to the larger ticket items that people buy, whether it's a television or anything, what might you do? Might you order something online and have it shipped for free? A number of ways that folks start seeking a way to save 2% on that purchase. So yeah, we do see that happen.
And matter of fact, I hear the same thing because communities have sales tax at a certain rate, and they say, well, you know, the next community doesn't have it, so if we're going to go buy a car, they go over there. But I think one time, John, you were telling me about the fact that those are actually adjusted, because if you go buy in another area, some of the sales tax comes back. Am I right?
Well, the local,
Yeah.
cities and such can put sales tax on. They have that authority. They have that taxing ability. So if you're looking at Tim Home
Yeah.
Chevrolet.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And he's very, he's very competitive. He tries to be very competitive.
Does a good job.
And what we're talking about when the city talks about raising sales taxes, he's always concerned because he wants people to come to Abilene, not go to Salina or some other location. So especially when you get big ticket items, vehicles that cost $35,000 or whatever. So sales taxes are important to local communities as a source of revenue. However, they should not be the only source of revenue. And with cities competing against each other, it makes it very difficult. But I wanted to ask Steve about the flat tax. I've heard about the flat tax. I've read the bill. Is that going anywhere? I think maybe you'll explain what the flat tax is.
Well, there are a number of different concepts
Right.
in terms of how many brackets do you have, and one concept that actually is fairly attractive in concept at the state level is a single bracket, so that there's just one rate. And what we've been talking about just in the last couple of days is there a way we could make a 5% rate work?
Mm-hmm.
And then to that, we want to be careful what impact we put on the lower end of the scale. So that there are exemptions and deductions that help take care of the group that is in the lower end. And then a flat tax can work. The difference, the bill that passed went from 5.25 to 5.45 on the difference in the upper bracket. And a change of 0.2% is absolutely a change. It is more progressive. At the same time, you're introducing complexity without a huge change in total revenue collected for that additional bracket. So the concept of the flat tax is, can we do something that people can remember, that you could have your calculation on a postcard and be done? Right. And that's the goal, to try and get there. I think we will actually see a proposal come forward early next week, working on an amendment that we could write to the one bill. Both of the bills that we had were insufficient. Mm-hmm. The one had a rate that was so low that it was hard to get it where it needed to go. The other one had been written when we started at the session. We put the repeal of the business tax separate from the other ideas to try and hear a series of them and put them together. So when it came out by itself, it fell short. But I think when we put them together, we may see a different picture.
But we would agree that the best tax plan is a tax plan that gets 63 votes.
Yeah, or ideally more. Exactly.
Or more.
Exactly.
Well, then in addition to that, you have to take into consideration the Senate position, and what is their position in regards to like the flat tax, because if you send it up and then they don't agree and it comes back and there's amendments, then from what John tells me, that's a process that goes through and then it starts back over, and it looks like to me eventually you run out of days.
It is
patience,
a process,
one or the other.
And we were running out of both. So, so we saw that really exercised the first time through. Mm-hmm. The Senate right. has not added a different position yet, although we're all talking about the same things. But on the first time around, we passed it out of the House. The Senate then happened to pass that bill. Normally, they would have done their own. Then it went to the governor. On the override, we got 85 votes in the House, just one over the 2/3 requirement. And out of the 40 senators, we got 24 that voted to override, but the 2/3 needed 27. Still, to get 24 on a tax bill, when 21 is your simple majority, is often all you get to pass. So it tells us we're somewhere around that magnitude of revenue and that type.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Legislative Updates. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with my special guest, John Barker, and special guest, Stephen Johnson. And John, I know, of course, this is on your third term here in the legislature. Stephen, is this your second? Third?
Going on the fourth now.
Fourth term. So, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. And, you know, I had, this is something I read in the newspaper the other day about the exemption, sales tax exemption on fencing material. And I was in and out of the car, so I didn't get to hear all of it. But tell me about that.
Well, the wildfires that we had across the state, of course, were devastating, and there's not a lot of things that can be done to immediately turn it around. It's been wonderful to see the outpouring from across the state and surrounding states to help with that. One thing that we had done a year ago was to exempt those fencing materials from sales tax. We do pay sales tax on fencing materials, so rather than have that additional 8 or 9% cost to the fencing material, we exempted that for those replacing fences from the fire.
And those who have suffered that, the fire damage and replacing that, how do they go about when they go into the ranching store of some sort, they go to get the fencing? How do they activate that rather than just come in and say, my fence burned up and so I pay no sales tax? Because somebody's got to make an accounting of that.
Exactly. So the store will be able to help them, but if they go to the Kansas Revenue site, and I will get a link that we can go to on that, that will give them a chance to either apply for an exemption certificate that they can carry in with them and not pay the tax up front, or if they've already purchased it, they can send in for a refund from the Department of Revenue.
Excellent. And at the end of the show, we'll put that link on there so that they can go to it. Now, in regards to the 2017 bills that have been passed so far, are you satisfied with the progress the legislature is making?
We've actually passed quite a few bills, and there's a number I'm happy with.
Right.
I was really happy with the progress on that bill because it was introduced and passed in a week, which is really fast.
Quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with what the House has accomplished. The Senate is a little slower. They've not passed as many bills. Hopefully that will change. I think they're going on general orders today. But overall, I'm happy with the session. You know, we're concentrating on education, we're concentrating on appropriations, and we're concentrating on taxes, and that's where we should be. And so I'm comfortable. I'm very confident in Stephen that he will be able to build consensus on a bill at some point in time that we will all get behind and pass. It will be a revenue bill if we keep our appropriations down. But of course, the school finance out there, which is the Supreme Court, we've passed Medicaid expansion. We've got to look at whether or not the Senate passes it, or whether or not the governor passes it, and then look at that revenue that expenditure that we'll have to find revenue for. So Stephen's job is very challenging, and but he's well respected in the House, and we're quite confident he'll get it done.
Well, and you've started now on the 2018 and maybe probably the 2019 budgets. Would that be right?
That'd be right.
So you've got to project well into the future, and that's got to be tough.
It is, and you lose some accuracy as you go further out. But as John was alluding on that, it's the numbers. What does it add up to? I'm a little concerned about it getting to be too big a number to still build a consensus on a tax plan, which will be a tall order. But we do have some idea. Some things are pretty well set in terms of what the amount will be, either coming in or going out. Others can vary widely, so there are a lot of assumptions made. But it's actually helpful to try and project a little beyond that to get an idea of whether the kind of the trajectory of income versus expenses is meeting it, or if we're headed the other way, so that we actually have projections that go through 2020 and 2021 to help guide. I wouldn't pretend that they're accurate, but they do give us a sense.
Yeah, some ballpark to at least try to play in. Is the governor's position in regards to the flat tax, do you know what it is? I mean, when you're in the legislature like that, is there somebody from the governor's office that comes by and says, you know, governor doesn't like this one, that one's not going to work if you're sending it, or they come by and they say, here's what the governor's thinking. Does that happen?
It does, on different issues and at different times to different degrees. So sometimes they let us work on things or struggle on things, whatever the case is, and others they say, you know, here's a direction that we think we might be able to go along with. So in the last few days I've had the chance. So he has legislative liaisons who talk to us regularly. The budget director works with us as we get into some of the details. The Secretary of Revenue and his team all help us in our work and then provide some guidance to say, here's what would work. So the governor has indicated more interest in the flat tax, and that changes the dynamic of what we have to do to get something passed. It is a tall order to come up with 2/3.
Oh, I can see where it would be if you've got to, you know, say, okay, can we get this through the House? Now what's the Senate going to do, and then what's the governor going to do? There's a lot of pieces of that puzzle to balance, and I admire the work you guys are doing. I hear stories about KDOT and not enough money, not enough highway funds, and not enough money for them. Where's that at right now?
Well, certainly part of the discussion that continues. The good news is the motor fuels tax is dedicated to KDOT, and there's $133 million roughly in our maintenance projects that is funded by that, about $44 million additionally in the preservation projects of the T-Works program. But to do all the maintenance or the preservation that we need another $100 to $170 million per year. So where does that come from? And there's been discussion. Do you bond it? Do you raise the fuel tax? Do you put it in this overall tax bill to try and get there? It's probably at the second tier after you deal with Medicaid, some of the other salary issues, and some of the other things that are right at the front door.
And then what about on capers? Because I hear, well, that account's been suffered some withdrawals. Now how's that work?
Well, our funding is still in good shape on that all in all, and the progress we've made is there. We need to continue that progress. There's some desire to back off of that. I think that could be risky.
Okay. We're going to cut away. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to visit a little bit about the education bill. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm visiting with Stephen Johnson and John Barker from the Kansas Legislature. And we were talking, during the break, we were talking a little bit about the school finance. Where are we at with the school finance? Because I remember, John, last time you were here, we were talking about, well, there's a mandate, but there isn't a figure. And so we're trying to come up with that. Where's that process at?
Okay. Bill was introduced in education by the Chairman Campbell. It's 2410, House Bill 2410. I've met with Larry a couple of different times. You can go to the website, our website at Kansas Legislature, and bring up House Bill 2410 and read it. I've talked to Denise Guy, our superintendent in Abilene, about it. There's some good points and there's some bad points. Smaller districts who have done well under the block grant that was created a couple of years ago, have been having a declining population. So they've kept the same funding. But when we go back to this formula, it goes back to per pupil. And the state aid per pupil will go up in this bill. The concern that Denise had with me was the new facilities waiting. They're taking that out, and I've talked to both Chairman Arns and Chairman Campbell, because we passed a bond issue in Abilene a couple of years ago. So under the old process, we would still get some aid for new facilities. With this, so they've agreed that they're going to try to grandfather that in along with Salina, because Salina had a large bond issue at the same time Abilene, I think a year later. So that was helpful. They are changing a few other things. Transportation cost goes from 2 miles to 2.2 miles for student busing. And there's a number of other issues. And again, they're working the bill. They'll work through the process. Where we end up, I don't know. But we will have that probably maybe as soon as next week.
That'll be awesome.
Sure.
Letting the network know we're going to keep going. We're going a little longer. Network, you'll have to adjust for this part right here. Okay. Stephen, in regards to the health care, Dan Hawkins, Representative Dan Hawkins, was here last time with John and was talking about the funding needed for this, and some of it depended upon what the feds did. And what can you tell us about this?
Medicaid expansions.
Yeah,
right.
Medicaid expansion.
Right. Well, you had the expert, and unfortunately, we still don't know. So what will the feds do? What is the risk to that? How much will we have to pick up? As we're trying to adjust the budget for that, there is actually some upfront money that we have to put in. We were trying to estimate that this morning. And it looked like another $29 million that we would need to come up with to get through the initial part, to get some of the match back that we wanted, et cetera. So still working through the weeds in that.
Yeah. Hope you've enjoyed Legislative Updates with John Barker and Stephen Johnson. We'll see you next time for Legislative Updates. Thanks for watching. Hope you have enjoyed this segment of Legislative Updates with John Barker. I'm Doug Thompson with special guest John Barker. Tune in next time for another Legislative Update. Thanks for watching.